Great. Well, I think we'll get started. We're 1 minute past now. So, firstly, thank you everyone for joining our session this afternoon. This is a session on circular design. My name is Louisa Corsi, and I am a business support partner at Zero Waste Scotland. A little bit about Zero Waste Scotland for those that don't know us. We are a not-for-profit environmental organisation, and we are by Scottish Government. Exists to lead Scotland to use products and resources more responsibly, focusing on where we can have the greatest impact on climate change. So by using evidence and insight, our goal is to inform policy and to motivate individuals and businesses to embrace the environmental, economic and social benefits of a circular economy. So obviously today's session is all about circular design. So I thought I'd just give a very, very brief introduction to what we actually mean by the circular economy. And of course, our speakers will go into more detail on this later, but just as a brief introduction, the circular economy, it's a systematic shift in the way that we think about and design products. So it's a move away from our typical linear or recycling approach, and instead incorporates the ability to use products and materials again and again, and again and again. So decisions made early in the design and manufacturing process are really key to deciding how products and services are used, and then also how they're handled at the end of their life. So to make things last longer, which is the key ambition of a circular economy, making things last longer, designers have to consider circular principles at the very outset of a product or service inception. Any later and it often becomes too late, so that initial thinking is really key, and it's why designers are so important in that move to circular economy. So design has typically been part of the problem in transitioning to a circular economy, but that also means that it has huge potential to be a major part of the solution, and this is what we'll hear more about today in the session. So our agenda today, we have a great lineup of speakers. First, we're going to hear from Josie Warden, Head of Regenerative Design at the Royal Society of Art, Manufactures and Commerce, and she's going to talk about the importance of circular design, so we'll give us a really nice introduction. Then I'm going to pass over to Christoph Benson-Lassault and Jacob Andreas Lutzen. They're creators of the Circular Product Design Tool, which is a fantastic online tool. So they'll talk us through that tool and some of the strategic decision making that you should take when thinking about circular design. And then we're going to hear from a couple of case studies. So these are local Scottish businesses who have incorporated circular design into their sort of business development and thinking. So first we'll hear from Mark Burns, Director of RhinoWash, and he'll provide an idea of how they've incorporated circular design into their pressure washer product development. And then we're going to hear from Daniel Sutherland and Ben Jurak, co-founders of Origin, and they're going to talk about good design in relation to plastics, tooling and technology. We'll finish off with a Q&A session, so we save questions to the end, and then we're aiming to finish at about 4:15, so we'll try our best to stick to that time. Just to finish with a brief bit of housekeeping, you'll have noted that videos and microphones are turned off. So if you do have any questions for our speakers, please enter them into the chat function, and then we'll take a note of those and look at them at the end of the session. So we'll answer those at the end. And also to note that this webinar is being recorded. It's going to become a permanent resource on our website for others to view. So don't put anything into the chat that you wouldn't want to be shared at a later date. So without further ado, I will now pass on to our first speaker, Josie. So Josie, over to you.
Thanks very much, Louisa, and thanks again for inviting me to be here. It's really, really good to be here. I'm just going to get my slides up. hopefully you'll be able to see them now.
Yep.
Yeah, great. Excellent. Yeah, so thank you so much for inviting me. As Lisa was saying, I'm going to give again a bit of an overview of why we think circular design is so important, and the role that design plays in shifting towards a circular economy. And it's building a lot on what Louisa just introduced around what the shift is that we need to see in terms of a circular economy, and also the sense of like why design is so important, not just as a kind of later stage in the game, but also as the kind of upstream thinking to support your businesses. But just to give you a bit of context around who we are and who I am. So the Royal Society of Arts is our short title, but we have a history of supporting arts, manufacturers and commerce. We're an old organisation, about 260 years old, and have always seen the importance of widespread change being driven by people and communities wherever they are. And so at the moment, we say that we unite people and ideas to resolve the challenges of our time, and we do that through bringing research and analysis of data, through running design programs and supporting people to develop their thinking around their design practices, also through lots of public events, and through supporting our fellows who are members of the organisation to work on their own activities. And we're really interested, I guess, in the role of change in society and what is needed for change to happen, and how people can be equipped to sort of support moving towards a future that we want to see. And so in terms of kind of where we are now, given the context of what's happening in the world and why circular economy is so important and why design is so important within that, we know that there are lots of complex and interdependent challenges that we're facing at the moment, from the impacts of products and pollution that's created in the way they're produced, in the way that they're used, through to the kind of impacts, the bigger impacts on climate from our current fossil fuel economy, and the kind of lack of long-term thinking around the impacts that we're having on the environment, but also the kind of social impacts that we're seeing. So huge amounts of inequality we saw in the pandemic, the kind of richest small percentages of the population hugely increasing their wealth, while most other people were suffering the opposite problem. So we're seeing these kind of polarities both in wealth and income, but also polarities in kind of political discussions and perspectives about the future. So we're seeing that there's a kind of what overall we think it adds up to a real kind of shift and sort of some breakdowns in the structures and systems that we've been working with for the last few centuries, and a need for a real change in the way that we think about society and the kind of way that we produce things within it, in order to move into a much better future that is kind of going past these problems and resolving them. And so kind of building what Louisa was saying just now around the direction that we think is really important is this kind of this shift towards a circular and regenerative economy. I guess what we mean by that is kind of, as Louisa was saying initially, that we've had this kind of linear economy for the last centuries around taking things out of the ground, making them into products, throwing them away, and that's been very extractive in the way that it's engaged with the environment, in terms of depleting soils, degrading environments, deforestation, etc. But it's also had an extractive result on many people and communities too, in terms of inequalities, the sort of impacts on deindustrialization in some areas, etc. And there's a kind of breakdown around like those kind of community and social sides too. So we want to see the shift away from that economy, moving through this kind of sense of sustainability. How can we, do less harm and create less impact? But actually also moving beyond that into this idea of circularity and regeneration, where we are really trying to go beyond doing less harm into doing more good, and thinking about how, as a society, we can replenish and regenerate our communities and the world around us, and how that can happen generation on generation, which is a very different situation to where we currently are at the moment. And so we think circular economy plays a really key role in doing that and in making that transition. And in terms of design's role within that, I think we talk at the RSA about design being the kind of what if question. So we do a lot of work around research and analysis, which is excellent at telling us what's currently happening, shining light on the kind of situation that we're currently in. But design is also really important then for saying, okay, this is where we are now, this is what's happening, what do we want to happen next, the kind of what if question. And part of that is really trying to unravel the idea that there is not a kind of set future out there for the direction of travel, even though we're in the situation that we are now. There are many different ways that we could go moving forward. And as we move, trying to sort of reach for this circular economy future, there are still many ways that that could play out and different ways that that could look. And no one has a kind of clear answer of exactly what that should be on their own. Instead, the kind of role of design is about kind of exploring and shaping what that future is. Because as we design and explore new products, those products will then in turn shape the way that we think and act in the future. So there is this really kind of symbiotic relationship between the way we kind of act in the present and the role that design can play in developing and kind of exploring what the future could look like. And so we think there's kind of a shift away maybe from this sort of left-hand side idea of like the future as a kind of continuation of just what we have now, into actually opening up to the possibility of very different ways of living. And circular economy is kind of a really good way for exploring that, because there are so many ways that we can take this from where we currently are. And so kind of building on what we mean by circular design. So this is building on the work of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who we do a lot of work with at the RSA, and who obviously are really the forefront of thinking on circular economy, and kind of three big transitions in terms of design, the kind of needs of design within circular economy. Firstly, around eliminating unnecessary waste. So that might be looking at where there is kind of lack of efficiency in systems, or where there is products and services in use that actually are just creating huge amounts of waste and could be which could be reduced or which could be replaced with a different way of doing things altogether. So that could be around, for example, single-use plastics, a recognition that is really problematic, and actually looking at more kind of ways of creating reusable products or creating services so that people don't need to be creating this waste from single-use items. There's then a second area around circulate. So this is kind of what Louisa was saying earlier around keeping products in use and being kind of reused over time. So a classic example of that is something like Zipcar, where instead of everyone needing to own and operate a car, when they live in a city, actually there's this opportunity for that to be shared and more of a rental model where people can access it when they need to. So we're not kind of having valuable items kind of not being used at their capacity. And then finally, this idea of regeneration. So this is kind of that sense of going beyond just that doing less harm into actually how can we think about replenishing and restoring what's already there and what is kind of has been suffering recently. So the image on the right is around thinking about things like regenerative agriculture, where farming methods are actually designed to replenish soils, to sequester carbon, to help prevent flooding, but also to kind of create good work and good social relationships within communities as well. So these three kind of areas of like missions of design within circular economy are really important. But again, there are different ways of kind of achieving those. And so at the RSA, we worked on a programme called the Great Recovery several years ago that looked specifically at the role of design. And this is a model that we still use really regularly, because I think it really sums up the different ways of approaching design if you're looking towards those three different missions of eliminate, circulate and regenerate. And so this gives an example of different models that you can think about in terms of your products or services that can support moving towards a more circular economy. So we have on the outer circle, maybe the more kind of classic approach to circular economy, which is around designing for material recovery. So at the very least, ensuring that recycling and material recovery can happen in an effective and efficient way in a system. Slightly kind of further in as a sort of desirable loop is thinking about designing for reuse or for remanufacture. So how can products be part of not just a kind of one sale system, but also a system where they can come back, be remanufactured, resold again, to ensure that they can be kept at their kind of highest value. And then the two kind of inside loops are perhaps the most desirable ones. So designing for leasing or service models. So this is maybe something like the Zipcar example, where instead of kind of needing to own products and look only at a kind of sale model, what is the kind of rental service that could be offered? So you're offering access to something as opposed to necessarily the product itself. And I think the classic example is the kind of drill around people not needing to own a drill, they need to have a hole in the wall, and actually you can deliver that as a service model rather than an ownership model. And then finally, the design for longevity. So kind of starting your thinking around how can anything that I make be in use for as long as possible, given the kind of function that is going to be needed for. So some items may be able to be designed to be used for a really long time, repaired, looked after, but actually to stay in use at their kind of their main, their first function for a long time. So there are lots of different ways that this can still be explored. But I think what I wanted to sort of make a note of here as well is around looking at design and the kind of underpinning mindsets that sit underneath circular design. Because again, as Louisa said at the beginning, design obviously has a huge impact on the way products are used. So what you design it to do, what materials you design it to use are really going to determine how that product is used in the long term, what happens to it in its second, third, fourth lives, hopefully. But actually, starting with the product is an important step, but also there are kind of some deeper areas where design can also be really helpful, and that's around thinking about what are the kind of behaviors you want to help design for people who are using your product. Are you wanting to encourage people to maybe keep something in use for a longer time than they'd be used to currently? What are the behaviors that might need to be cultivated? What are the kind of structures and business models that would allow you to do that? So a rental model is a very different to a traditional retail model. So what is the kind of business model that needs to go underneath that? And again, design and the kind of way of thinking about what are the possible futures that you could develop and who needs to be involved in developing them is a really important part of that conversation. And then underpinning all of those is this idea around mindset. So we are all used to kind of looking at the world in our own particular way. Our economy, our families, our culture, all of that shapes the way we think about the world and what we think is possible in the world. And again, design has a really interesting role to play here too, around opening up possibilities for thinking differently. Again, we're very used in the kind of current economy to think about the desirability of having more things. For example, consumerism has been a really important part of our culture for the last couple of centuries really, but actually maybe that's a mindset that could be shifted, and design and the way that we create products can have knock-on effects on the way we think about things and kind of encourage people to think differently and to be open to new opportunities. And so two things that we think are really important around circular design mindsets are firstly around seeing systems and interdependence. And so this is the idea that actually our social, our economic and our environmental systems are not only kind of connected, but they're really complexly entangled with one another. So the way we think about the world will affect the way that we act in the economy. The way that the environment kind of sits around our society will really affect what is possible for us in the future. And this kind of connects to work by people like Kate Raworth, who talk about donut economics and this kind of shift of our thinking in the economy towards being seeing the environment as the kind of outer layer of our economy, and then the environment and the society and our economy sitting within those nested layers. So it's really important in circular economy thinking to be in design to be thinking about how those different layers interact. So as you're designing a product, how is that impacting on the environment? How are you as a business impacting on society? And how are those things kind of connected and affecting one another? And then the second kind of mindset that we think is really important to bring to circular design is around the ambition to kind of test, evolve and iterate what you're doing. And this kind of builds on something I was saying earlier around there is no definitive way of doing this. There is no perfect sort of system for us to find and just move into. We have to kind of build that as we go. And so it's a challenge for businesses and organizations to kind of be thinking about this in a very developmental way of like, we're going to try something, we're going to learn from it, we're going to build that in, we're going to share that knowledge, because as we move forward, the world is always going to be a changing place and there isn't a kind of perfect circular system that we can kind of build and then leave it as is. There will always be these kind of iterations, and that's what we see in nature around us, the kind of constant evolution and shifts and changes that happen within these complex systems. So to give a couple of examples of what that could look like in practice, this is an image of a partnership called Grady and Robinson, and they are looking at creating traceable leather from regenerative farms in the UK. And so the leather industry is hugely impactful and hugely problematic. It's also a very popular product that is used a lot within fashion, within automotive, etc. But it has huge impacts on the environment in terms of the way that the animals are reared, in terms of the way that the leather is produced, in terms of the waste of the products, but it also has huge impacts on society. Again, once the kind of way that the land is used, there are huge problems with deforestation in the leather industry and the beef industry, and also on the workers. So the way they're tackling it is to look at the kind of interconnections between these social and environmental challenges and say, actually, we need to find a way of thinking about leather as a really useful product that could be part of a really healthy kind of food system and a healthy fibre and textile system. So they're working very closely with lots of different people from across the industry, from farmers to regulators, to luxury brands, to tanneries, to abattoirs, to try to understand what the infrastructure is that would be needed to enable designers to understand where their leather comes from, to make sure they're buying into a system which is having benefits across the whole supply chain. And to do that, they really need to think about that kind of interdependence and how things connect to one another. And they really need to be engaging with lots of different people from across the system. And so the image on the right is also another diagram from our Great Recovery Project, which is kind of trying to highlight just a few of the many people that need to be involved in circular economy, and actually kind of building those silos across industries is really important. And then a second example around the sort of testing, evolving and iterating space is these are two different examples of people who are looking at creating change within the jeans industry. Again, hugely impactful product that many of us will have multiple pairs of in our wardrobes. And so on the left, it's the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and their Make Fashion Circular initiative. And so they've been working with around 60 brands, I think, around the world, looking at how to create guidelines to improve the circular economy credentials of their jeans. And that's everything from looking at construction and how they can be made to reduce the number of materials that are involved in them, through to the indigo dyes and the washing, and the durability of their products. So they're looking at a kind of global system of like, how can they come together as businesses in a pre-competitive space to create these kind of guidelines that people can then work on and build on over time. And there will be this kind of iteration and development as they start to learn as brands what is working, where the problems are, where is the opportunity to push this even further. And then the second approach, which is very different, is a design that's happening in the north of England, and it's called Homegrown Homespun. And the people involved in this project are looking at creating locally grown hemp products within the region around Blackburn, which is an area where they used to grow lots of this fibre, but actually have not in recent years. But there's also a huge kind of industry still of production and skilled workers. And so they're looking at, actually, if we were creating a circular fibre system, maybe we could start from place and start from the kind of qualities that we have in the community, in the land, and begin to grow again a sort of a very different fibre system that's much more based in place. So you can see there are very different approaches to doing this, but through this, they're kind of learning and being able to share with one another the different skills that and ideas that are coming through. So then I'm going to wrap up, but just to leave you with three things. I think there's so much to circular design, but the kind of the product space is critical, but it's also really important thinking about this sort of deeper layers of how are you approaching your work. And I think these three things are really important. So around, it's a journey. There is not a single way of doing this. No one knows exactly what it should look like, and it will always be a journey to kind of develop and change these things over time. So it's a kind of setting out and exploring different paths. The relationships that you form and that are kind of particularly across different industries, different kinds of skill sets and disciplines are really critical, because again, no one has the bigger picture. Everyone can only build it up by working together and learning and sharing information. And then finally, that the kind of mindset you bring to this, if you can think about embracing those kind of ideas around change and development, and the need to kind of iterate and really think about how systems fit together, that will stand you in really good stead as you start to approach any kind of design, whether it's from product, service, business model. It starts you kind of having that mindset that will really hopefully unlock ways forward. So I'm going to end it there and hand it to some people who can give you some really practical examples of how that's worked in their businesses. So thanks very much, Louisa.
Great, thank you very much, Josie. That was a really great introduction. I think, yeah, it's fascinating to see how you could change behavior, you could shift mindsets, and it makes you think about the power that designers potentially have in shaping the world we live in. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of working together. You know, not one single company is going to have all the solutions and all the tools in order to transition us to a circular economy. It's key to work together and to share learnings. So I think it's organisations like Zero Waste Scotland and the RSA that, you know, are here to help share those learnings. So yeah, the more the better. Great. Well, thank you, Josie. We'll now pass on to Christoph and Jacob, and they're going to take us through their circular product design tool and their experience of circular design. So over to you two.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having us at this webinar. We are calling all the way from Denmark, so we hope you can hear us loud and clear. We are
all good, yeah.
That's good. We're very happy to be here at this webinar, and we're gonna discuss a little bit about what are the challenges today when talking about circular product design, and we're gonna see how a design tool can help designers and product managers accelerate towards a more circular economy. So our background, let's see here. Second, hold on. Okay, now we got the slide. Our background is design engineers within product and system design, product development, and with a focus on sustainability and circular economy. My name is Christoph, and today I'm a creative designer at a digital agency.
My name is Jacob, and I'm currently working as a consultant in the Danish Technological Institute, where I as well work with a large digitalization project called Circle Bank. And for just to be on the safe side, nothing of this we're going to talk about today is affiliated with either Technological Institute of Denmark or Circle Bank. It's a result of what me and Christoph did in collaboration with the Danish Technological Institute and Bang & Olufsen. First of all, I would like to say a big thanks to Josie, because he's talking about some very broad and difficult stuff that I wouldn't be able to say any better. And for that reason, I've brought two very simple slides, because I guess we all kind of have an idea that there is some major issues with the linear economy and the way that we bind value generation to the use of new materials. And we produce and use products for a very short time, and then afterwards dispose of those materials on landfills or incinerate them for new energy. So what the circular economy proposes is, of course, the decoupling of this value generation and this economic growth to the use of new materials, but instead utilize the materials that are already in use and the products that are already in use by prolonging the lifetime of the products for as long time as possible, and then recycling the residual value of the materials, and thereby limiting the amount of landfill and waste from the systems. But that, of course, is a major challenge for product design, because products are not designed to sustain this vision. But that was where we came from as product designers. How can we create enablers for strategies within the circular economy? So we're going to zoom in a little bit in difference with Josie on more product-related issues and more product design issues. So as Josie talked shortly about as well, we've seen on it in three different ways. When you talk about circular strategies, we can talk about narrowing the amount of material going into our system by reducing or designing out parts, or designing out materials, or completely designing out products by digitalizing them. We can prolong the life cycle of or the use cycle of products by extending the existing use of products by upgrading them or repairing them. We can extend the products to new use cycles by designing them so we're able to refurbish them and remanufacturing them and reselling them as well for economic values. And then the one that is often set as an equal sign to circular economy, which is the closing of the material loop by recycling the residual materials that are in the products. So I brought this handsome guy just to illustrate one of the major problems that we face starting out with trying to work with product design in circular economy. That we are working in a world where with a language of efficiency and fashion as well, that dominates a more slim design and a more smaller design, where product seems or components are integrated in products and harder to access when you want to repair them or upgrade them. So it proposes a large challenge when you're working with product design. And a classic example of that is of course the cell phone. That is where we almost forgotten that at a point in time, and back in 2010 there was actually phones where you could take out the battery and change the battery yourself. But there's been a almost contradicting change in the way we design phones. And as you see in the blue columns, in 2016 it was almost 85% of all phones that had integrated a battery. And from a circular point of view, that is kind of contradictory, because we know that the battery is the main component that decides the lifetime of the product, because it's degrading in quality over time. Another challenge that we face is the way that consumers think about products and how we as consumers use products, because it's not only when a product is broken that we dispose of it. It's as well when it's aesthetically outdated or functionally outdated or technologically obsolete. So that's why we hear buzzwords as sustainable or aesthetically sustainability. You want to design something that lasts aesthetically for many years. And why we can talk about strategies as upgradability, that we want to be able to update the functionality of the products. And the graph that I brought to you from a Dutch report just shows that from their statistics, the design lifetime is significantly longer than the measured actual lifetime that they measured in their report on several different products. And as Louisa said as well, as product designers, we work a lot in the conceptual phases of product design and in the redesign of products. And now I brought a number here with me today that 80% of all environmental impacts across the product life cycles are defined in the early design stages. And whether that is a correct percentage is not that important for me, but the point that it's trying to make is very important. In the design phase, we're taking a lot of decisions that locks how the product, which materials we add to our production, how we produce it and how we assemble it, how we take the product back and how we disassemble the product potentially at the end of use, and how we can recycle each component. A quick example from the Danish industry is a headphone company called III, which is focusing on repairing and upgradability of their products by creating this mass customization platform where the customer has large possibility in designing their own products. But as well, because of the modularity and the easy disassembly, they have a possibility for exchanging a single component when a component is broken. So you can extend the product from one life cycle to a whole nother life cycle, but just displacing one component rather than the whole product. And then theoretically continue doing that until, yeah, I guess you don't want the product anymore.
All right, so what we have tried to do is make a design tool for circularity. This is a result from a master thesis from the Technical University of Denmark, And we have built and designed this tool in close collaboration with experts within both the academia world, but also within the professional world. And we have also built this tool in close collaboration with the Danish audio brand Bang & Olufsen. And what we basically ended up with was an Excel tool that was a more customized or comprehensive tool for Bang & Olufsen, which also focused a lot about the whole design product development process of circular product design. And what we then did was to kind of boil it down and simplify the tool and put it on a website, which is free. So what I also wanted to say is that this tool is built for manufacturing companies. For instance, it could be an electronic manufacturing company designing headphones, or a hardware company designing toilets. We have been working a lot with guidelines. But what is a guideline? Well, it's a set of recommendation or guide to support a specific area or design task. And it can help a product designer with clear instructions toward good practice. And it is often used when you don't have the time or money to make a life cycle assessment, and you don't have much time in a design project. And what it can enable is to promote consistency and a systematization between both, people in the team, but also between design projects. We have one example here of a guideline. It could be use screws with the same metrics. And what we have here is a picture. We took a headphone apart, and we found out that in this picture there's two types of matrix. So this is a bad design compared to if you want to make a product more repairable or easy to disassemble. So we also just want to disclaim something. We don't have the solution to circular economy. We try to take something very complicated and simplify it. And we are not guideline geniuses. We are only the collectors and selectors of all the different type of design guidelines there are. So what we found was very interesting when looking at guidelines is that there's different levels of guidelines. There's these very overall strategy type of guidelines, which is a product-oriented strategy that describes the intended end of life of a product. This could, for instance, be recycle or repair. Then in the other end, we have these more actionable, tangible design guidelines, specific guidelines that relates to a specific design action. This could, for instance, be arranged material identification in easily visible places. In between those, we found also something that we call design focus, which is a more general guideline that each describe an area of product design. For instance, enable inspection. So what we did was we found around over 1,000 guidelines, and we started a process of selecting different guidelines compared to if they're actionable guidelines or whether they're product design oriented guidelines or not. Yes. And this is the backbone of the tool, and this is what we think is very interesting, is that we made a correlation of these different levels of guidelines. So we have, we found out we had 10 overall circular strategies within product design, and within those we found 16 design focuses, and within those we found 120 design guidelines. So if we take an example here, if we look at the strategy called repair and maintenance, there's a couple of design focuses within that. Let's pick enable inspection. Well, within that design focus, we found we have filtered out some different guidelines. For instance, use standardized materials identification systems, and so on.
If I may add, this is really where we put in a lot of work, because a lot of people before us have collected this circular strategies. A lot of people before us have collected design guidelines, but we put a lot of work in together with a PhD from DTU, the Technical University of Denmark, to make a logic going from strategic decision making to product design related strategies, design focuses, and all the way down to design guidelines. So this staircase logic, going more and more detailed, is something we used a lot of time on.
So we just wanted quickly to jump over to the web page and give you an example of how one designer might find inspiration visiting the site and filtering through. So
are you able to see the web page?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So let's say you're a product designer that manufacturing headphones, and your team has decided to focus on, let's take the obvious, let's focus on recycle strategy. It will then filter out the different design focuses, and you as a designer can quickly get an overview of what is actually possible in this strategy. And let's say we want to look into design for disassembly. Well, we can open this design focus, and we can see all the specific guidelines within this design focus that correlates all the way up to the recycle strategy. Here's an example, for instance, within joints and connectors, minimize the amount of joints and connectors, minimize the different types of joints and connectors, or use standardized joints and connectors. So this is just an inspiration for designers to kind of have the same language as the more product managers type of people in a team, and have some sort of same language when talking about circular product design. Yes. And let's jump back to the presentation.
Of course, we would like to encourage you to open it afterwards and take a look and just scroll a little bit around, because what we think that we've done nicely with this homepage and with this webpage is not that we're going to have described the complexity of a circular economy to its fullest, but we have given a very simple overview of the logic of some of the design strategies. And as the former disclaimer disclaimed, there will be exceptions, but what we've done is to try to simplify something that can't really be simplified. But it gives a very good ideation, inspiration tool. That's at least one way of using it, that as a product designer you can go in and browse around and get inspired and use it as almost as a brainstorming tool. But something that we got really inspired by working with an organization with this tool was that there's a strong value in working with strategies and a clear path from going to strategies all the way down to an action plan. So in the same way, you can as well use guidelines and as almost as a checklist for fulfilling your strategy, and as a guideline to create the right KPIs and create the right goals for your strategy. And then lastly, use these decisions to communicate and concretize your visions and how you're going to fulfill those visions to a team or to in the rest of the organization. And lastly, just a comment on how we worked with the product design processes. And obviously, you're gonna start in the planning phases to work with the backbone of your product development. Which strategies are we going to focus on in this product development process, and how is this going to suit the other products in our portfolio? But then we as well encourage you to decide upon some design focuses And that could be several design focuses enable this design sprint to succeed with your goals. And then lastly, use the guidelines as a product designer to utilize the strategies. So a very generalized way of doing it, and it's not going to fit all, but it's a proposition that was made to fit the case company that we worked with. And lastly, because we are Danish people and we are very modest, we don't pretend to be expert in everything, and we feel like there's a lot of good materials out there. So we linked some guidelines to some other guideline pages, and to a very nice eco-design guideline as well. So if you get the slides afterwards, I think you will. You can click a little bit around in some of our inspiration.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Christoph Jacob. That was a really useful introduction to the tool. And I think it helps to illustrate that there are so many circular design guidelines out there and approaches that you could take, far more than we could possibly cover in one session. As you say, you can do a whole master's thesis on it. So I think that's a really useful tool that people can go to and use to suit their own requirements, and pick and choose the guidelines that are relevant to them. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing it. And yeah, I encourage everyone to take a look. So circularproductdesign.org. Great. Well, thank you very much. So now we'll move on to the second half of the session, and this is focusing on sort of case studies of businesses that have taken these guidelines and incorporated them into what they do. So I'm going to pass over to Mark Burns, Director of RhinoWash, based just outside of Glasgow, and he's going to talk about how they've incorporated circular design principles into their pressure washer development. So Mark, over to you.
Great, thanks guys. I'll just try and share my screen here. So hopefully you guys can see that okay, yeah?
Not yet.
Give me a second. Yeah. Are we seeing that yet?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. So thanks for inviting me along to speak. Maybe a bit different from the first two speakers, but certainly my name's Mark Burns. Along with my brother John, we run and operate a business called RhinoWash, where we design, manufacture and service industrial pressure washer equipment. The types of industries which we serve: local authorities, road haulage operators, plant construction, equipment owners, operators. Some of the type of companies which you would see just on the first couple of slides here. So we work with a lot of OEMs, people like Volvo and Scania. We do a lot of work for the Ministry of Defence, the ambulance service and the rail networks. That's just a sort of flavour of what we do, and just a wee bit of background to how we got here. I guess our business was formed over 45 years ago by my dad, Dennis, which at first they started out in industrial cleaning. However, quickly the business evolved into manufacturing our own equipment due to, I suppose, the only way to describe it was a gap in the market for fit for purpose equipment. We've, I suppose, had a strong heritage of being a designer and manufacturer, but innovating. In 1983, probably the thing that really gave us a big step in the market was we designed and developed the first ever static cabinet type pressure washer. That's opposed to maybe a portable style pressure washer, which would be the norm. The key sort of milestones are probably what's been shown there. You know, in 1998, we happened to acquire another sort of well-renowned engineering firm, and that formed the company at that time as Scott Clean Warwick. Fast forward another number of years, 2004 was really where, I guess, our step into the breach of what we now know as circular economy was the innovation of our quick swap modular design. And then 2009, we rebranded the business under the current name RhinoWash. And I suppose that was really to fit the sort of kind of growing marketplace and the sort of the joined up world that we work within. I suppose to fast forward to present day, it's where we kind of continue to innovate, manufacture and service to really the same target and end result was always to get the right solution for our clients. The design principles, I guess the key drivers, as a UK manufacturer, we've always had to continually need to find new ways of keep a step ahead of, I suppose, the cheaper foreign competition. That's always where we've had to compete. It's always been one of our biggest challenges. But the key principles of building equipment, designing equipment that's been for robustness, reliability and longevity over maybe aesthetic design is probably one of the things that stood us in best position. Seeking quality rather than price has seen us utilize probably in a lot of our product more metals than maybe plastics, where a lot of competitors went. A big key thing was always about understanding and interpreting the client's challenges and pains, and sometimes that meant not just what the client was telling us, but also for us to understand it at a ground level, where it would see us challenging the status quo, and that kind of brought about our innovation to always be continually improving the efficiencies. That been through our whole business. We've got quite a, I suppose, a broad spectrum from a lot of businesses where we both design and manufacture and we're the service provider, all under the one roof. Sometimes manufacturers, maybe they're the manufacturing outlet, but they have distributor channels. We're a bit more sort of kind of overarching. So the constant innovating, the self-improvement tends to always be an internal competition, you know, benchmarking ourselves, not resting on the laurels that we have. Consistency, again, key principle for us. It was touched in the last presentation quite succinctly about we've always tried to ensure that we adopt standards, you know, that being most commonly British standards. Our ISO accreditation we take very seriously, but the commonality in use of parts is a big one for us, to ensure that wherever possible we try and be slick and streamline in our supply chain. You know, circular economy, I think it would be unfair for us to say that our intention at the outset of design was circular, because it really wasn't. But I think it's quite important to recognise that the correlation between our core and key design principles and the capacity for circular remanufacturing is to be noted. The values that we had passed down from my dad, Dennis, to always innovate whilst keeping the quality at the forefront and produce robust, reliable equipment which are fit for purpose. really kind of made the transition into circular quite easy. Those kind of key principles led both my brother and me in 2004 to develop the quick swap module design, which I'll share a little bit more about. But at that time, we didn't really appreciate at that time that was our first stepping into a circular design model. I suppose, like many things, you know, what you're seeing here is progression from our early days and how maybe the product started to develop. But I suppose, like many things, it didn't come by chance. We were, I suppose, we became a bit of a textbook example of a victim of our own success. The cabinets which you see in the photograph here were the early cabinet static style pressure washers, and prior to that, the only thing were portables, these things on wheels. And I suppose in the early 80s, we gained a great success and dominance, probably because of that innovation and those steps forward in the industry. But in a kind of unforeseen series of events, our equipment became something which was on the client's site that had to be serviced and maintained on their premises. There was no way to remove that and bring it somewhere else or ship it. It was kind of secured there, and therefore the requirement to service out in the field, you know, kind of snowballed. And probably in late 2001 and sort of kind of 2002, a number of kind of unforeseen events and really a shortage in our capacity as a business to have the personnel and the engineers, qualified engineers, was lacking. And then probably the first time in our history, we began letting customers down due to not being able to respond in a timely enough manner when electromechanical equipment began to fail, which even at the best of quality equipment, electromechanical equipment will require maintenance, it will fail. So that kind of led us to this design here, which is the modular design. And where I spoke there about the equipment being out in a customer site, the modular design was born from the pain of the experience of letting down the customer and having that strong desire to, I suppose, never again find ourselves in a position whereby a lack of personnel or a specialised skill sets would restrict our ability to provide the promises or deliver on the promises that we make. So I'm just going to try and just share a wee bit, just so you can actually see how. I'll share a video, hopefully, that you guys can see. This just gives I suppose, an overview. One of the things that we do as a business is we guarantee a first-time fix, which is a fairly bold statement. But these two key components are the heart and soul of that make up any of the RhinoWash systems. We have a burner to heat water, and we have a high pressure pump, and broadly most of our solutions will consist of at least the pump, and in most instances it's a hot wash system. So the design that we come up with enabled us that no matter what actually went wrong or goes wrong out on the customer site, we're able to get out on site. In the event that something's wrong, we can simply take that module out and swap it over. And I guess it was that design and the shift in our capacity to fix it has really what's changed our business. At that time, little did we know that these modular components that we designed and how we would come to handle them at the end of their normal life would result in the beginning of our circular economy journey, really without knowing that. Sorry, let's come back to the start again. Yeah, so our journey, how did it start? Well, like many businesses, there's a drive and a desire to take control over costs and, where possible, fix those costs. RhinoWash customers, they have the same desire, and as we continue to evolve our offering through preventative servicing solutions to meet the client's needs, we began offering more rental-based solutions, whereby instead of the client purchasing equipment, the client became accustomed to paying a fixed amount per month. The downside to maybe sometimes having such reliable equipment is that customers who purchase equipment will tend to sweat the asset. And it was interesting on the last presentation showing the life expectancy and the actual life. Maybe we would buck the trend there, I would think, because one of our challenges was always that clients would keep the equipment maybe far too long, and that was as a result because the equipment was built with quality in mind. But if they kept it too long, the equipment often gets beyond the stage that remanufacturing, recycle, reuse, sometimes it's too far gone. So the gradual shift towards rental saw us no longer dependent on perhaps the customer's decision of when the equipment was life expired, but rather ours, and gave us the opportunity to take used equipment and actually bring them back and breathe new life into them by reprocessing them through our factory once again. I guess key to that was always going to be the quality aspect, the ability for components to have long life. And as an environmentally conscious company, we've never been one for throwing away material if we could find a need for it. So through trade-ins, part exchanges with our clients, we started to accumulate quite a significant amount of these modules, and noted that particularly the modules themselves could be reworked, reutilized, and prevented from effectively going to landfill, which we see with a lot of the clients, a lot of our competitors' systems. Where are we on this journey? Well, I guess although we've been remanufacturing now some time, our modules, it was really probably in 2019 that we really concentrated our focus on how do we develop this model across our business. I guess one of the things that we recognized was that to be fully circular, we needed to make a massive shift, which from selling products to hiring them. And the challenge with that has been both the manufacturer and the end delivery and service provider. It is quite challenging. Our original business model was designed around continual and growing order book for new and replacement equipment, whereas the circular approach, whilst it still requires investment in new equipment to supply demand, the ultimate goal is to continually re-inject new life into older used products. So that's a major challenge. The financial requirements is probably the most significant, shifting the financial model, where the time frame of return on investment maybe is probably on average 4 to 12 weeks typically, and the kind of the linear type model approach that you talk about, to a model where even meeting the break even could be more like 1.5 to 2 years. So that is a massive shift as a business. But I guess the help and the support that we got from Scottish Enterprise and Zero Waste Scotland helped us explore and delve into what a circular economy business model would mean or could mean for us. And having been through that and having looked at it in detail, we made the decision to really try and progress and invest this into the ethos and the fabric of our company. So much so, we managed to secure investment through Scottish Enterprise for our research and development project, which allowed us to develop the current product offering with some prototypes that would enable us to become more fully circular instead of only, let's say, the modules, which was really what we had been doing. So as a kind of direct result of that, we've been able to develop a new fully remanufacturable product enclosure, which will start to tie up some of the areas which currently we're not circular in, and this is in sort of progress at the moment, and should be in our factory soon, to allow us to put it out in the marketplace and really start to make some headway. So you can see here the product and the product development key to that moving forward.
Just to note, Mark, we're running a little bit behind time, so if I could encourage you to sum up, that would be great.
No problem. So I guess what have we learned thus far? You know, the adoption and the education, I think what we see is it requires to be driven from a government level. The legislation and the guidance, I think that's going to be essential to enabling faster adoption through against the current restrictive procurement processes which are in place. The ability to assess offerings by these procurement departments from an environmental benefit rather than just cost, which I think anybody who's involved in government procurement at all, it's almost currently always favouring lowest price point rather than true environmental impact. Education, both the clients, our staff, the people that are involved, the supply chain. But I guess the biggest challenges that we find as an SME, time and finance. The government, the support both for terms of finance and skills is going to be essential for any business like ours pushing on. So I guess the last thing to say is maybe ultimately the success for adoption of circular is going to be a direct result of the efforts through organisations like Zero Waste and the government to meet the net zero targets that we have. So thanks guys for listening.
Thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate it. And I think that's really useful to just illustrate, how this theory applies to so many different types of businesses, any types of products, whether they're, electronics or, clothing, pressure washers, every business has their role to play in this transition. So thank you for taking us through your journey there. So we will now move into our final presentation from Daniel and Ben, co-founders of Origin, and they're going to take us through an example of what they've integrated into their business with regards to circular design. So over to you two.
Thanks very much. Let's share this. There we go. Okay, are we fine? Are we presenting away fine there?
Yep.
Thank you. So first of all, thanks very much for inviting us to contribute today. Really do appreciate that. It's been fantastic to see the presentations today. They've been great. So my name's Daniel. I'm here with my co-founder Ben, and we're both product designers with many years of experience of developing new products, particularly in the plastics space, and that's very much a part of our experience and our approach. So Origin and what we're going to talk about today, it's a startup with a clear mission to introduce what we've been calling micro circularity at localized levels.
So I'm aware, especially in an audience like this, that we'll all be acutely aware of the staggering stats that come into play as soon as we start talking about waste plastic. But just to give you a really quick overview, we're talking about 8.3 billion tons of plastic that's been produced to date, of which they estimate 6.3 billion tons is already considered to be waste, which is a number so big that it's impossible to get your head around. So to put that into context, if you imagine taking all of the land that takes up the UK and its islands, and if imagine if we transplanted all that waste plastic onto the UK, we will literally be standing up to our knees in it. That's how much plastic we're talking about. And a lot of that plastic was used for less than 15 minutes. Of that 6.3 billion tons of waste plastic, they estimate only 9% of it has actually been recycled. And that kind of begs the question, do any of us actually really know what happens when we throw our plastic waste into our recycling bins? And this is a question that up until around about a year ago, very few of us could actually answer. But with Greenpeace breaking the news that plastic waste in the UK was found burned or landfilled in Turkey, it's clear that our plastic waste isn't always being exported to be recycled. So relying on centralized models results in a lack of transparency and incurs huge amounts of carbon in that supply chain involved in collectively transporting or shipping this waste around the planet.
So plastics are a big part of our experience and our mindset as designers. And there's a concept that we talk about in the design world. It's called the designer's paradox. It's where a designer kind of confronts that issue about the fact that they are responsible for creating new things all the time, more and more new things, new stuff. And designers need to challenge themselves and to challenge their design process and how they can actively contribute to positive design changes and positive behavior change, and really understand how we can be active as designers and still create positive impacts and positive changes. And Origin is very much about that. It's about affecting real behavior change through transparency. We call it circularity you can see. And it's very much about putting our whole design process and our whole approach to design on show to the people that we engage with, to our stakeholders, and to our customers. So it's about carbon savings because we deliver our approach at a localized level. As I touched on before, we talk about micro circularity. And we work with lots of companies in our locality to collect plastics, and we design and develop products within our Origin hubs.
So this is our first product. It's a mini planter that kind of falls into a category of products that we like to describe as aspirational products. So it's a line of products that essentially enables the public to use their purchasing power to do a bit better. So just sort of taking a look at this product and unpacking it to try and sort of understand how we approach circular design on a zoomed in level. So obviously our planter has been designed with longevity in mind. So it's a product category that lends itself quite nicely to longer product lifespans. We've incorporated a second material, porcelain, for the drip tray in this case, which already has existing connotations and perceptions of value, which overarchingly help to increase the sort of perceived value of our product. We've considered the entire user experience throughout the entire design process. We use a custom recycled paper packaging that clamps our planters in place, using a plastic-free sticker to then hold that product safely during transit without the need for excess packaging. When posting our packages abroad, we typically use home compostable mailing bags. Very important to put the word home in there. Our planters are branded, arrive to your door with branded seed paper to give our customers an out-of-box experience, hopefully creating a stronger connection between our customers and our products, which we hope leads to a longer lifespan. All of our planters use 100% locally collected, locally recycled, and locally manufactured waste plastic. The recycled plastic is celebrated through its minimal form and marbled aesthetic. The product's been designed to be mass market. That's really important to us. It's really important to us that our products are excessively priced. That allows us to have larger impact. Design for manufacture is very much the starting point for any design development at Origin, ensuring our products are optimized for manufacture right from the outset. which ultimately leads to improved efficiency, waste reduction, and helps us to sort of meet our aim of producing something that's accessibly priced. And in part, this was also the reason for our first product being a planter, being that turning something is potentially cheaper and easier to do than having to use a 3, 4, or 5-axis CNC. So with local waste plastic collections, we also accept origin products back for further recycling, although I'm happy to report that we haven't had any back yet.
So really, for us, it is about impact, and it's about different kinds of impact. So we're all aware of the fact that there are impact in terms of carbon savings, there are impact in terms of material savings, and some of the amazing presentations we've already heard of this afternoon talked a lot about the difference between a linear cycle and a circular one. And when you talk about plastics, when anybody starts talking about plastics, you cannot get away from the issue of scale. Plastic is all about scale. One is wrapped up in the other. And we've been really keen to try and innovate around the way that we deal with that, because we're talking about delivering design and production services at a localized level. So how do we do that with a scale? And our innovation here has been to develop 2 different types of product line. So we have aspirational products and we have what we call impact products. And we've been pursuing both of those lines as a way to allow us to ramp up our volumes of plastic usage. So we get through as much plastic as we can and we redivert that away from centralized models, and we can use that. And we've also been creating aspirational products and impact products. So aspirational, an example of that is our first one has been the mini planter that Ben just spoke about. And it's about creating high quality products that people want to buy, people are buying into. And the other thread is what we're calling impact products. And they are products where we've been working with companies, businesses around us, businesses within Scotland, and we've focused on agriculture, aquaculture, the brewery industry. We've been working quite closely with those 3 sectors quite a lot over the course of the last 18 months. To give you an idea of a type of product, we've been identifying things like plastic insulating discs for electrical fences in the agriculture sector, or certain types of safety part, shall I say, for the brewery industry, to not want to say too much about that. So we've been looking at how we work with other partners to develop products like that, where we don't need to sell those products at a price point that creates a margin for us, because our aspirational products allow us to do that instead. And right now we're actually working as a result of a Zero Waste Scotland backed project right at the startup phase. In our experience, we're now working with a really large organization in Scotland that has over 150 sales sites, where we're developing a new range of products for them, where we can turn localized plastics into new products for that company.
So obviously Origin is a company that was essentially created as a way of impacting on plastic waste. And so we have very clear core values, one of which is obviously transparency. And over the last sort of 18 months, we've been trying to package this up into some simple design rules, so that any time we're developing a new aspirational product, we have a really clear idea of what success looks like. And so we package these up into 7 rules. So first up is heirloom. So this is all about designing with longevity in mind. So all Origin aspirational products should really be designed with heirlooms in mind. The type of product that holds enough value to extend its product life and possibly even get handed down from one generation to the next. So we realize that's very lofty, but we set our aspirations high. It should be about celebrating recycled plastic. So the marbled plastic should really be the focus, embodying Origin's core value of transparency. That marbled aesthetic is very intrinsic to our manufacturing process. And ultimately it means that even though each mini planter is the same in terms of its form, its aesthetic will always be different. So each product is unique. Mass market is very, very important to us. Each product should be designed to be accessibly priced. Origin's about empowering everyone to affect change and should not be seen as elitist. It's about using elevated materials. So we try to use a second material that has an existing connotation of perceived value, and should really be incorporated within every aspirational product. This material really shouldn't be the focal point though, because it's really about the plastic. Design for manufacturing sits at the very core of everything that we do, and should really be the starting point for any design development. Obviously, it goes without saying that our products should be designed with a cradle-to-cradle approach. So considering the entire design journey and product life cycle and end of life for that product. And then finally, regulations. So the regulations surrounding waste plastics essentially define the types of products that we can or cannot produce. And so clearly that needs to sit at the very center of everything we do as well.
Finally, just to kind of wrap things up, we told you about where we've been, what we've been doing over the course of the last 2 years or so. We've come to a point where we've developed our first product, we've launched it, we've had incredible sales actually at the outset. But that was very much a test bed product, and it was a non-regulated, low regulation product. And what we're focusing on now is taking that onto the next step, and using all of the design rules and all of the ethos that Ben just ran through there will be employed in the design and development of our next product, which is going to be a lighting product. And we are developing an approach to a lighting product where the parts of that product are intrinsically circular. So we're reducing the number of parts within our products by creating a central recycled plastic fitting that will allow us to attach it to a wide range of different lampshade SKUs. So we're able to build a product portfolio in this space that has a much bigger offering with fewer parts. This is a regulated product. So as far as we're concerned, we're really ramping up our approach to product development through this particular product. And it kind of, it represents the next step on the origin journey for taking products to market. And while we do this, we'll be intending to increase our scale of impact that we create through the use of plastic as we grow. So I would just like to thank everybody for listening to us, and we'd welcome any questions that anybody might have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate it. And I think that goes to illustrate the importance of actually the materials that is being used in your design as well. So yeah, crucial aspect to consider. I'm aware we've run slightly over time, but hopefully we can squeeze in 5 minutes of questions. So if you do have any questions, please put them into the chat, and then Daniel or Ben, I'll get you to stop your screen sharing as well. So we have had one question in so far. So this is from Joel, and it's asking, what part could tax rebalancing have to play in supporting a circular economy? So resources are obviously really cheap, labor is expensive. What about tax? How could that be incorporated to help sort of rebalance things? I'm going to pose that initially to Josie. Josie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think we're hearing from some of the speakers just now too around the difficulties that happen around the financing of this, that tax is a really important way of thinking about how this can be rebalanced. I think I'm not an expert in this area, and I think that people who are looking at it in much more detail. But for example, so we've been doing quite a lot of work around the fashion system and this, and we know that there are challenges around where tax is charged for refurbishment or repair, where it isn't maybe on kind of some of the newer side of things. So I think that it is sort of similar in many locations across the industry. So things like that are really important for the government to be looking at, and I think it's a lot of it's around how to balance out the kind of longevity conversation that needs to happen within this, because we're not used to kind of working within that. So I think it is a really important space, and anything around the kind of financing of this is critical, because it is a real shift in the way businesses have been acting. So I'm afraid I can't give anything more concrete than that, but I think to say there are people who are working on it, and I think it's a really important place of those kind of creating the conditions for this to be able to happen.
Yeah, thank you. Has anyone else got any comments on that point? No, right, we'll move on to the next question. So this is one for Ben and Daniel. So when you talk about turning rather than 5-axis CNC, so this is getting proper product design here, is the raw material a large billet which is then machined to produce products such as plant pots?
Sorry, I should have been clearer when I was talking there. So I was referencing the fact that obviously as a startup, funds can be quite tight. All of our production happens in-house at our micro origin hub. So we're really centered around injection molding, which takes advantage of, I guess, our skill set. But obviously commissioning the tool that you would need to be able to produce the plastic parts from, there's a couple of routes that you can go down for that. And ultimately for more complex parts, you'd be going down obviously a 3, 4, 5-axis CNC route. But for our first tool, we went cylindrical so that we could actually use a CNC lathe, which essentially brought our cost down by about 5x.
I think it's also important to say that one of the reasons we focused on injection molding as a process is, on the one sense, Ben and I have got a lot of experience in the past of that, but in the second, it allows us to sit within an industry that really connects us to volume. You know, what we're looking to try and do here is to develop products that can be produced at volumes. And there hasn't been a great deal of time today to be able to talk about the technology side of what we're interested in, but we're also really interested in kind of new advances in tooling that relate to the likes of 3D printing, etc. One of the core initial ideas within Origin was to utilize advances in 3D printing for tooling where we could reduce tooling costs massively, especially at localized levels. And I think that's a really important aspect that we'll be looking at in the future.
Great. Yeah, I think there's some big opportunities there. So next question, how do we ensure that sustainability features higher in the procurement matrix when buyers are making purchasing decisions? And actually, Mark, I'd be keen to get your thoughts on this because, you know, obviously quality is big for yourselves. You mentioned that you use metals rather than plastic, and perhaps that does increase your costs, but clearly you still have been successful and you've got some big buyers, some big customers. So how does that work for you?
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest challenges, particularly the larger organisations. Actually, I think are a bit more ahead of the game, dare I say it, than the government in terms of local authorities. We've been dealing with local authorities and probably for the best part of our existence, and probably in the last 10 or so years, it's become evident that, you know, a product such as ours, from a price point, because we focus completely at quality, is the biggest hurdle for the local authorities to make a buying decision around, and 90% or probably even more of tendering opportunities that we see are generally completely weighted on price point, and if that doesn't shift, without a shift there, I can only see this being very challenging, and unless they bring in some other type of legislation, or you talked there about tax breaks and tax rebalancing, but there has to be something which quite clearly articulates the benefits of the circular model. I have a lot of conversations with local authorities, and there's an awareness, or there's a familiarity of what circular is and what it's intended to be, but it's nowhere near reaching the points that it's within their influence, or making any influence on the decisions that's been arrived at. You will find that the bigger organisations, more blue chip clients, are more ahead of the curve, more interested to, or certainly more geared up to listen. But there's still a big gap, I would say, in terms of meeting. We talk about what's the targets and the, we've just come out of COP at the tail end of the year, but really, where does that actually result in actual savings? And I think that's where, until procurement and the higher echelons or the hierarchy that's there are really more switched on to that, is going to be the biggest challenge, I think.
Yeah, the status quo is, it's hard to change, absolutely. Though I think it's Zero Waste Scotland as a circular procurement work stream, and it's certainly something that we're working with Scottish Government on, and we recognise it's important. So yeah, definitely key area for development in the future. I have another question. This is quite a big question, but why is most of circular economy very hard to do practically when it clearly is the better option? I wish we knew the answer to that one. Anyone want to give that one a go? Christoph, Jacob, any thoughts on that? Why are we not doing more of it when we should be? It's the better option.
Yeah, I think you're completely right in that is a really big question. But I think some of the things that we experienced was that circular economy can seem like the good option always, but the act of designing is always a trade-off exercise. So the circular solutions might not always be the best solutions with regard to quality, manufacturing, price, all these other kind of things. And secondly, it's a very much a stakeholder exercise within an organization. So it's not enough that you, as an individual in the person in the company, thinks it's a good idea and drive this change. The change needs to come from within and from the top down, as well as the bottom up, to really get the change started and get the change integrated in the backbone of the company to really get things shifting. That's at least our experience with working with companies with circular economy.
Great, thank you. I noticed Mark, JC, you've both got your hands up. Have you got some quick comments to come back with on that?
Yeah, sorry if I may, I think the big thing there is we do live in a throwaway society, of what has been predominantly for a number of years. You just have to look at the white goods markets, and that's that's a shift. There's a price sensitivity as well, but it's not just at purchase price. That's one thing, but it's the through life cost, and there's quite a perspective there across all the presentations today, where you're starting to see this, but it's that message getting out, and becoming much more on point, and that's going to make it easier to adopt a circular economy, because I can understand it's very hard to do, but it's obviously clearly the better option for the environment.
And JC?
Yeah, just briefly, I really agree with the comments now around the changes to come from everywhere. And I think it's that sense of, and it's a really nice quote that I like around, when you try and pick out one thing, you realize it's hitched to everything else in the universe. And that sense that all of this is so entangled that it's really hard to try and solve it in one area. And I think even the last few years, we've gone through a phase of like, oh, it's about materials. Oh, it's about, actually more than that, it's about services. It's about business models. It's about the design of the economy. It's about the way we think about our relationship with each other in the world. And that can seem crazy and massive, but actually it's only when we start thinking at that big system scale that I think we will be able to make that bigger change happen, because it can't happen just in one part on its own, because everything is so connected.
Absolutely, yeah. Daniel, you've got a comment as well.
Very quick thought here. It's just to kind of link to what Josie was just saying there. I think it's also a challenge for businesses as well, who begin to start to think about being more circular when they realize they're connected to all their suppliers in their supply chain, and they may not necessarily be as circular as they want to be, etc. And sometimes it's not as easy as just becoming completely circular, because you're so connected to so many other areas of your business or somebody else's.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, I'm going to leave it there because we have completely run over time, but thank you to everyone that that has hung on. I'm just going to very quickly just do some closing slides. And this is just to sort of summarize what people can do next if they are looking to, pursue some more circular design objectives. So we have a circular economy business support service. This is free and impartial consultancy support to businesses in Scotland who are looking to pursue more circular business models and services. So if anyone's interested in that, you have an innovative project that isn't yet commercial, then please get in contact with me and we can see whether you might be eligible. We also have an investment fund. This is a grant fund specifically for SMEs, again to businesses that are pursuing circular economy products or services, though the eligibility criteria are quite strict and the programme is coming to an end. We might see something else come in, so keep an eye on this space. Also, just to highlight our website, circulareconomyaccelerator.scot. This is a great website with lots of resources, introduction to the circular economy, case studies, tools. So I would encourage you to take a look if you haven't already visited. Just to note some upcoming events, we have a Circular Economy Kickstarter webinar on the 2nd of March. And then on the 16th of March, we have another thematic webinar, Product as a Service. So keep an eye on our website for further details. So I'm going to finish there. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much to our speakers for taking the time to speak to us today. Thank you to everyone for attending, and please get in contact if you do have any questions or want to follow up. But thank you very much and goodbye.